Hello there, Internet. Today it's time for a bit of extended analogy making. We're going to be talking about sustainability in the practice of being a happy human being. And I like to use the metaphor of dieting for that. Once in a while, I like to go for a little bit of a dive into the literature on diet, nutrition, interventions to reduce one's weight and whatnot. And in general, metabolic syndrome, like the way that modern diets tend to throw off the regulatory systems in our bodies that cause us to get things like heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, all that kind of stuff. And when you go muck around in that literature, what you find out is really, to a reasonable first approximation, any diet works so long as you can comply with it. As long as you can just keep doing the thing, you will actually lose weight. And the real difference between diets that are effective for helping people intervene in their health and in their weight and ones that are ineffective is really just the sustainability issue. So let's put that in context. So if you look at any given distribution of your macronutrients, right, your fat, your protein, and your carbohydrates, you can find pretty much every distribution in some indigenous population around the world that is full of healthy people. People who are normal weight, people who have no systemic health issues, really low rates of heart issues, basically non-existent diabetes. You can find people who have very high carbohydrate diets. You can find people who have very high protein diets. You can find people who have very high fat diets, and it all works because they are eating relatively unprocessed foods, natural foods that their bodies have regulatory mechanisms to stop them from eating when they no longer need food. It's about satiety, right? The feeling of, yes, I'm full, I'm going to stop eating. That regulatory mechanism is a hormone called leptin, and basically, if your body secretes leptin, you have leptin receptors that turn your brain's like, let's eat food signals off. Your body fail-safes to being hungry all the time, basically. Unfortunately, fructose, which is fruit sugar, it's half of table sugar, breaks that regulatory process. So it makes our bodies really leptin insensitive. And so then at that point, once we're leptin insensitive, we can't feel full. We eat, but we don't have the experience of satiety. And so then we eat more calories than we need. Our body has to do something with that. If you're leptin insensitive, you're probably going to store calories because your body actually, through a whole bunch of hormonal signaling mechanisms, believes it's starving even if you're eating a ton of food. Gnarly stuff, throws you out of whack. And the reason that that's so important to be mindful of for dieting, and the reason why any balance of macronutrients can actually work as long as you're removing the sugar that's making you leptin insensitive, is that most people are actually unaware of how much they eat. So most people who eat a modern Western diet are constantly taking in calories that they just don't really clock, because they don't go through the cycle of like hunger and satiety that marks like a session of eating. They're just snacking all day, every day, and they're never feeling full, and so it never registers as like I've had a meal, I've had a bunch of food. And so the reason that all diets work is by making people just aware and giving them a target. So if you're on a diet, you're thinking about your food intake. And if you're trying to like compare each thing that you're going to eat to the slate of options that you've made available to yourself in the diet, that awareness, just that bringing consciousness to the choice of like, am I going to eat this, will drive your caloric intake way, way down. And if you have that kind of awareness and you have strict compliance, even if you're eating a ton of sugar, you can still lose weight. Even if you're completely breaking your body's signaling mechanisms and it thinks it's starving when you're eating a bunch of food, as long as that bunch of food is within the caloric constraints that are healthy for you, you will actually lose weight. There's, folks who do like a Twinkie diet as a stunt and lose weight. Is that healthy? Probably not. But the point is that as long as there's that awareness and that effort at compliance, then it will work. But for most people, a lot of diets are not sustainable because they don't have the experience of satiety to help them regulate their intake, and they don't have the conscious awareness. And so what happens is if you create a really restrictive diet and then people are trying to comply with it, then they fail to comply with it, then they feel like a failure, and then they just go, well, if I've already failed this much, I may as well fail all the way. They go completely off the wagon. It's a tremendously unfortunate emotional experience, and then they're like, okay, I'm done with this. Right? So having the effect of bringing the awareness in while still making the intervention small enough to be sustainable as the person trends towards a healthy state where they can experience satiety and their body begins to self-regulate itself, is incredibly important to actually making a diet work, right? So the upshot of all of this giant ramble is basically any diet will work if you can comply with it. So finding a way to make that diet sustainable so that compliance rates go up is the path to actually having the outcome that you desire. Now I gotta look at time. Do I have enough time? Oh, I got plenty of time. Plenty of time. Okay, so how do we connect this up to the practice of being a happy human being? Well, most of us are awash in a sea of negative cognition that is so habitual for us that we don't even realize that I am paying attention to these really unfortunate, unpleasant, negative thoughts. And anything which focuses our attention on promoting those things that take care of us, right? Learning healthy cognitive patterns, learning healthy coping mechanisms for the stresses in our life, and finding ways to substitute positive, healthy frames of mind for all of this negative cognition that we're habitually engaging in, will improve our well-being. And so that can be, it can be a traditional religious practice like Buddhism or Hinduism or Christianity or Islam. They all have within them, buried usually, because, inquisitions and things like that, but buried within them, they have, practices that are centered around creating the sorts of conditions of mind that are good for your well-being. But it can also come from like traditional talk therapy or sort of more modern therapeutic practices like cognitive behavioral therapy, or, some kooky new age religion, or, anything you want, or just having a really good friend to talk to, and having, an openly supportive relationship, to bounce things off of people, to get what's going on in our heads out of our heads, right? Have it assessed, identify the negative cognition that has become habitual, try to intervene there. Anything that goes through those processes will help. It'll make you a happy human being. Now, some things better than other things. Some frameworks will give you more indications as to what sorts of cognition are troublesome or what sorts of patterns you need to be on the lookout for. Some systems are encumbered by unfortunate, silly metaphysics or, beliefs and practices that aren't actually helpful, but have just kind of attached themselves as cruft over the many millennia in some cases. And some newer systems might be encumbered by a bit of hubris on the part of their practitioners. But anything that has this effect of making you aware of just how much negativity is rattling around in your mind and creating a framework to bring in positive caretaking cognition to supplant that, and directing your focus towards what takes care of you as a human being will actually produce good results. Now, why am I saying this? Because a lot of people get really fixated on finding the right practice. Oh, I need to do this, I need to do that, I need to go to this therapist and this therapist. And don't get me wrong, finding a good practitioner is really important, but finding a good style may not be particularly important, right? If you find a good teacher or a good mentor or some sort of good support, it doesn't matter what system it's in, as long as that system is not, directly exploitative, it'll work, and you're better off staying within that context and making progress there than hopping around from place to place to place trying to find like the perfect optimal practice that's really gonna no. Find something that works at supporting your well-being and stick with it for a significant duration until you get to the point where your mind is in a more healthy state. It begins to self-regulate. It begins to be less habitually inclined to negative cognition. Once you get there, then maybe you can look around. Say, is there some sort of better framework I could be in? But getting to that point where you've put in enough effort to begin reaping the rewards of improved health is more important than trying to find the perfect thing at the outset. So any practice will work as long as it's sustainable for you. Now, having said that, a rant about sustainability. As soon as I check the time again. Oh, look at me. 6 cents. 6 cents. Right up against my time limit. Let's stop. It's beautiful. It's fresh. We got, a whole new session of possibilities. So, sustainability. What makes a practice sustainable? I think the most important thing about sustainability in practice is to make interventions small, because your mind, as it is in an equilibrium. And it may not be a pleasant equilibrium, but it is a stable equilibrium. So any effort, your current state of mind is like a marble at the bottom of the bowl. If you flick the marble, then it's going to tend to roll back to the bottom of the bowl, right? So there's going to be some resistance, some sort of inertia that you have to overcome by this steady, gradual application of effort in order to, get over the lip of the bowl and get into some new equilibrium. If you try to change everything in your life all at once, you are almost certainly not going to have a good outcome, and you're going to end up in the sort of emotional predicament of the crash dieter, right? Who's like, oh, I'm going to change everything about the way that I eat, and then temptation arises and they go a little bit off the wagon, so they may as well go all the way off the wagon, and there they are back to the same, eating habits that they had before, and maybe they gain 5 pounds out of the whole shebang. So you don't want that to be your life experience. You don't need to meditate for 3 hours a day, right? Meditate for 5 minutes a day. Set very low bars, right? You don't need to be in therapy every day. You don't need to have a giant list of things to take to your therapist. So these are all the things that are wrong. We need to fix all of these right now. You don't need to set an aggressive timetable for when all of your vices and bad behaviors are going to be out of your life completely. Right? If you try to throw everything out all at once, what you're going to discover is you just don't have the energy, you just don't have the willingness to sustain that. And then the emotional recrimination, the feeling of failure is so bad that you're probably going to give up on these practices that take care of you, potentially for a long time. So don't do that. Small interventions. Set a small goal and then continuously attain it, get that nice dopamine hit, and you're ready to rock. And then you can extend from there once that becomes habitual. One of my favorite sort of stories in this vein comes from the Quaker teacher George Fox and his disciple William Penn, who Pennsylvania is named after. William Penn was an English gentleman and a member of the Society of Friends, and the Quakers are pacifists, so it was a little bit at odds with some of the norms and social expectations that William Penn was living in, because he's a gentleman, he's supposed to wear a sword, he's supposed to, be armed, and that troubled him. Well, okay, is this worth it? Should I give up the practice of wearing a sword and, deal with the social ramifications of that? And so, troubled by this, he went to George Fox and asked. And George Fox's reply was, you should wear that sword for just as long as you can. And I think that that is right at the heart of sustainability in practice. That if you make your interventions small and you gradually accumulate progress, right, there will come a time when you have clarity about what takes care of your well-being. Eventually those things, those vices that in your life that don't take care of you, will become unattractive. And in the long run, they'll become intolerable. And then you can just let go of them without any stress, without any difficulty. It just becomes so obvious that that's incompatible with the way that you want to live your life that it's just gone. There's no possibility of going back. So for me, there are two things like that. One is that I'm a vegetarian, right? It's not something that I, proselytize, that I'm trying to get everybody to join me in, but I was very seriously into Mahayana Buddhism for a long time, and in Mahayana Buddhism, that's the teaching, is that you should be a vegetarian because your project is to not just cease the creation of suffering for yourself, but to cease the creation of suffering, full stop. And I'd heard all the arguments about that for years, and it just never was something that I thought that I needed to take on. I just kept cruising along, and I'd eat meat when I ate meat. And then one day I was meditating, I was sitting there, and something just clicked. And I was like, oh yeah, I get that. And I completely understood the why of vegetarianism in Mahayana Buddhism in a way that just sort of resounded in the core of my being. And I remember having this moment of going, oh, well, damn it, I guess I'm a vegetarian now. Not a moment of celebration or triumph or like, ooh, I'm a great person, but man, I really like carne asada burritos. Never again, huh? Well, I guess that's it. But I've been a vegetarian ever since, and it's never at any point presented any difficulty for me. There's not a single moment where I've been like, man, I really want to eat that meat. Just never has. In the same way, I don't really drink, right? Occasionally, I will indulge in drinking alcohol, but there's no risk of it ever being a problem because I don't like it. And it's not that... it's not like, oh, I don't like the taste, or I love the taste, okay? You give me some scotch, But what I don't love is the inability to track the fine-grained evolution of my mental state, which is kind of central to what I am doing in the world. And so it's just like, oh yeah, I don't want to be intoxicated, so I'm just not going to drink. Very easy peasy. Whereas if 15 years ago I had, gotten into Buddhism and just been like, oh yeah, it says that we shouldn't eat meat, shouldn't drink, blah, 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 so I'm just going to cut out, no more meat, no more booze. That would have required an effort. I would have wanted to do those things and not been able to do those things, and the friction between my desire and the restrictions that I placed on myself would have made my practice unsustainable. And probably I would not have gotten as far with that practice and reaped nearly as many rewards from that practice as I ultimately have by simply putting off compliance with sort of the dictates of the structure, of the system that surrounds the teachings, until such a time as I fully understood them. They resonated with the core of my person, and so not complying them was just incompatible with who I am. And so I think that's what is going on with William Penn and George Fox, and why he should keep wearing that sword for just as long as he could, is that when he has made enough progress in a sustainable fashion, incrementally, it will become obvious to him why he shouldn't wear the sword, and then he won't endure any tension, any stress from taking up that practice. And I think that focus on sustainability should be what guides everyone's practice, whether it's, practicing, here with me with this whole practice and happy business, or any other practice you're doing in your life. Make sure to make the goals small. Embrace gradual progress towards those goals, sustainable effort. Pick the smallest goal that you can that feels like achieving something, and build on that. And if you do that over time, instead of having to change your whole life and then maintain that for long enough for every single change that you've made to become habitual, just gradually those changes will arise of their own accord with no additional effort. And you'll find that it's actually, it's a pretty easy gig being happy.